Holy Mount Zion. Here we are, David's tomb, and where the Last Supper was, supposedly. Inquiring minds want to know. We'll find out.
He calls it something else.
The upper room, or Coenaculum, where we are, when you take one look at the building, you understand that this is not the place where Jesus had the Last Supper, because this is Crusaders architecture, so it was built from 12th century and on, which means it couldn't be the place where Jesus sat. But this is the location, and the tradition was always here that this is the place where Jesus had the Last Supper. One of the theories says that the people that Jesus had the Last Supper with were probably Essenes. Remember, we said that Essenes sat from Mount Zion down to the Judean desert. They based that on the idea. אתה יוצא מהכניסה, אתה יודע את זה. When Jesus tells the disciples, go and search for a man carrying water, the first question he would ask is, how would I identify him? In Jerusalem of Second Temple period, men did not carry water, usually women. Men carried water only if it was an all-man society, which was probably part of the Essenes. So one of the theories says that they spent time with the Essenes because they were related to the Essenes. However, the Crusaders accepted this tradition. They came here, they built this Last Supper room. They called it Coenaculum, and they said this is the place where the Last Supper took place, and later this is the place where the Pentecost happened. 7 weeks after, the Holy Spirit came to the disciples. This is the place where the Holy Spirit came 7 weeks after, and the disciples started preaching in different languages. Although some scholars in Christianity take that event and say it happened on the steps of the temple, which is not far from here. However, this place is called Coenaculum. But then when you look up, you say, hey, fine, this is the place of the Last Supper. But here you have Arab writing, you have Arab windows, you have that mahrab in the southern wall, all the characteristic of a mosque. Churches, they started as a Christian places, taken by the Muslims, they turned into a mosque. Now it's a Christian site again under the Ministry of Religions of Israel. And below us we have the Jewish synagogue where King David's tomb is. So you have the whole building that's holy to the three religions, which that's small, but in big, this is what happens all over Jerusalem, and that's what makes Jerusalem so complicated, because over the last 3,000 years it went from hand to hand. A few words about the Last Supper. Remember the painting of Leonardo da Vinci about the Last Supper? There's a table, people sit around the table, and there's fish, and there's bread. None of that is true, as you know. None of that is true. People wouldn't sit. The Last Supper was the Seder meal, the Passover meal. People would come to the temple, bring the sacrifices to the priest, get back a piece of meat, and you're supposed to go and eat it with your family, finish it by midnight, which is why Jesus made sure everybody will be together to finish it by midnight. You would sit on the floor, you would recline on the left side like you would do, like people would do back then 2,000 years ago. You would eat lamb and not fish. You would eat unleavened bread, the matzah bread, and not bread. You would sit without your shoes, because the first thing you do is take off your shoes and wash your feet. So that would be probably a Last Supper in Italy, European Last Supper, but not over here. Totally different. The whole idea of the Last Supper was people came for the temple for the only purpose of bringing the lamb sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice to the temple. And part of the laws of the Passover sacrifice said you have to take back this Passover sacrifice and go and eat it together with your family. And if Pentecost was here, or the event of Pentecost 7 weeks later, when the disciples started preaching in different languages, the Bible in the Book of Acts gives you a whole list of where would be the countries where those people would come from. And there's a whole list that shows you that Jews would come here from all over the planet. On Passover, you would find Jews from all over, Roman Empire, Greek Empire, Egypt, Judea, Samaria, all over. And the fact that those disciples could speak to each one in his own language enabled them later to start the opening up of Christianity towards the Gentiles, which continued in Jaffa by the vision of Peter, in Caesarea with the baptism of Cornelius, eventually with Paul going to Rome, baptizing Roman Gentiles, and at the end with Constantine and his mother Helena becoming Christians at the beginning of Byzantine period. And then in turn, Helena came back and started identifying the Christian sites and building churches over each and every place where some historical Christian event happened.
So you said
said people that were not of these would bring pigeons or
No.
birds,
Not for the Passover sacrifice. There were different sacrifices. For some sacrifices, people who were more with means would bring lamb, otherwise pigeons, otherwise just some kind of oil and something small. But for the Passover, it had to be oil. It had to be lamb, and the lamb was a lamb per family. And you would calculate the number of people in the family and take a lamb accordingly, because you had to third of that lamb would go back to you. You had to finish it before midnight, and you had to leave Jerusalem and go out of Jerusalem by midnight, which is the reason why after the Last Supper they all went back to Gethsemane, which is an agricultural area outside of Jerusalem, because the law says you cannot spend the night in Jerusalem, you have to camp outside, otherwise the city gets very, very crowded. So what you say is correct about other sacrifices, not correct about Passover lamb. Okay?